Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? That's exactly how Sarah felt until one unexpected night turned everything upside down. Sarah needed to get away from her small apartment in the city. Her husband Mark barely talked to her anymore, and the silence between them felt heavier than any argument. When she arrived at her Aunt Rose's countryside cottage, the fresh air felt like the first real breath she had taken in months. The house smelled like flowers, and everything seemed so calm and quiet. Aunt Rose was kind and welcoming. She talked about her garden work and community projects while Sarah sat by the window drinking tea. Sarah smiled and listened, but her mind kept going back to her empty marriage. That evening in the garden, she noticed a young man named Ben working near the plants. He was quiet and focused on arranging pots. Their eyes met for just a second, but it was enough to make Sarah look away quickly. The next morning was peaceful. Sarah read her book on the porch while Aunt Rose went shopping. Ben walked past carrying boxes and gave her a polite smile. She smiled back without thinking much about it, but she noticed how gentle he seemed, how he moved quietly and spoke little. It made her feel strange because she had forgotten what it felt like when someone actually noticed her. As the day went on, Sarah kept thinking about Mark. How he never asked about her feelings anymore. How they lived together but felt so far apart. She tried to push these thoughts away, but every time Ben walked by, she felt more aware of herself. That evening, Aunt Rose asked Sarah to help with dinner. Ben came into the dining room with a tray of dishes. When he set them down, their hands almost touched. Sarah pulled away fast, pretending to fix the napkins, but her heart was beating hard. She felt silly for reacting that way to such a small thing. Dinner was quiet. Aunt Rose talked about her charity event while Sarah nodded. Ben served the food without saying much. Sarah tried not to look at him, but she could feel his eyes on her sometimes. When night came and Aunt Rose went to bed early, the house became very quiet. Sarah sat by her bedroom window watching the moonlight on the garden. She heard crickets outside and felt calm, but underneath that calmness was something else. Maybe loneliness. Maybe curiosity. She just knew that for the first time in months, she felt like herself again. Before going to sleep, she walked down the hallway and saw the kitchen light still on. She thought Aunt Rose forgot to turn it off. But when she looked inside, Ben was there cleaning dishes. He looked up, surprised to see her. She gave a small smile and turned to leave, but that brief moment stayed in her mind as she lay in bed. The next morning was sunny. Sarah helped Aunt Rose water the plants and spent the afternoon writing in her notebook. She wrote about peace and silence and how nice it felt to be away from home. She did not write about Ben, though his quiet look kept coming back to her thoughts like an unfinished story. That night, as the clock ticked softly, Sarah thought about Mark again. How love can fade without anyone noticing. How two people can share a home but feel like strangers. She closed her eyes trying to sleep, but the sounds of the night seemed to match her restless feelings. She did not know what would happen next, only that something inside her was changing. The night felt heavier than usual. Sarah turned in bed, the sheets twisted around her legs. She felt thirsty and reached for her water glass, but it was empty. She tried to ignore it, hoping sleep would come back, but her throat felt too dry. Finally, she got up, wrapped a thin blanket around her shoulders, and walked into the dark hallway. The house was quiet, except for an old clock ticking in the living room. The wooden floor felt cool under her bare feet. She passed Aunt Rose's room and heard soft snoring. She smiled, glad her aunt was sleeping well. When she got close to the kitchen, she saw a small light under the door. She thought maybe she left it on earlier, but when she opened the door, she was surprised. Ben was sleeping on a small mat in the corner, with a blanket pulled halfway up. The kitchen smelled clean and fresh. Sarah felt awkward about disturbing him, but she really needed water. She walked quietly to the counter and started pouring water into a glass. The sound seemed very loud in the silent room. Ben moved and opened his eyes. When he saw her, he sat up slowly, rubbing his face. His voice was sleepy when he said, "I am sorry. Did I scare you?" Sarah shook her head quickly. "No, it is okay. I just could not sleep." He nodded and stood up to fix his blanket. "I usually sleep here," he explained softly. "Your aunt wants someone to watch the kitchen at night. She worries about the doors being unlocked." "That is fine," Sarah replied. "I did not mean to wake you up." She turned to leave, holding her glass of water. But as she moved toward the door, her blanket brushed against the counter and knocked a spoon to the floor. She bent down quickly to pick it up. Ben stepped forward to help. And in that awkward moment, his hand touched hers. It was an accident, but the touch made her heart jump. She stood up feeling flustered, her breath catching in her throat. Their eyes met. The air between them felt different, quiet but full of something they could not say out loud. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe apologize again, but no words came out. She started to turn away, her mind telling her to just leave. Then she felt his hand gently catch her wrist. Not hard or rough, but enough to stop her. It was like he did it without thinking, as if his hand moved before his brain could stop it. Sarah froze. The glass shook in her other hand, making the water ripple. For a second, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. His eyes looked confused and sorry and pleading, as if asking her to understand something even he could not explain. "Ben," she whispered, her voice shaking. He dropped her hand immediately, stepping back like he had touched something hot. I am sorry," he said quickly. "I did not mean to ... She did not let him finish. She turned and walked fast out of the kitchen, her heart pounding in her ears. The hallway felt colder now, the air sharp against her skin. When she reached her room, she shut the door and leaned against it, her hands still tingling where he had touched her. For a long time, she stood there staring at the floor, breathing unevenly. Shame, confusion, and a strange sadness mixed together inside her. She wanted to believe it meant nothing, that it was just a mistake because of silence and loneliness. But deep down, she knew it had stirred something she did not want to face. She sat on the edge of her bed, her heart still racing. The glass of water sat untouched in her hand. She put it on the table and pressed her hands to her face. In the darkness behind her closed eyes, she saw Mark's distant look and heard his distracted voice. She wondered if this moment in the kitchen would have happened if she felt loved at home. If her marriage had not turned into quiet suffering. Outside, the night grew darker. The clock kept ticking, not caring about anything. Sarah lay back down, but sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt again the brief warmth of his hand on her wrist and the guilt that followed. By the time morning light started filling the room, she knew that nothing physical had really happened. But something inside her had crossed an invisible line, and she could never go back. The morning sunlight came through the curtains, but Sarah did not feel refreshed. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered that moment in the kitchen. The touch, the look in Ben's eyes, the way her heart had raced. She felt confused and ashamed, but also strangely awake in a way she had not felt in years. She got dressed slowly, choosing a simple dress, and went downstairs. Aunt Rose was already in the kitchen making breakfast. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. Sarah looked around nervously, but Ben was not there. "Good morning, dear," Aunt Rose said cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" Sarah forced a smile. "Yes, Aunt Rose, thank you." But it was a lie. She had not slept well at all. She poured herself some tea and sat at the table, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. She kept glancing at the corner where Ben had been sleeping, remembering everything. Ben left early this morning, Aunt Rose mentioned casually while buttering her toast. He had some work to do in town. He will be back this evening. Sarah felt both relieved and disappointed at the same time. Part of her was glad she did not have to face him right away. Another part of her wanted to see him, to know if he felt as confused as she did. The day passed slowly. Sarah tried to keep busy. She helped Aunt Rose fold laundry, water the plants, and prepare lunch. But her mind kept wandering. She thought about Mark and how their marriage had become so empty. She thought about the years of feeling invisible, of sleeping next to someone who felt like a stranger. In the afternoon, she sat on the porch with her notebook. She wanted to write about her feelings, but the words would not come. How could she explain what she was feeling when she did not understand it herself? Nothing had really happened. Just a touch. Just a moment. But it had shaken something deep inside her. "You seem troubled, dear," Aunt Rose said, sitting down beside her with 2 glasses of lemonade. Sarah looked up, startled. "I am fine, Aunt Rose, just thinking." Her aunt studied her face with kind, knowing eyes. "Marriage is not always easy," she said softly. "I was married for 30 years before your uncle passed. There were times when I felt lonely even though he was right beside me." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "How did you handle it?" Aunt Rose smiled sadly. "I talked to him. I told him how I felt. Communication is like water for a garden. Without it, everything dries up and dies." Sarah nodded, but she knew it was not that simple. She and Mark had stopped really talking years ago. Their conversations were about bills, schedules, and what to eat for dinner. They never talked about feelings anymore. As evening approached, Sarah became more nervous. She knew Ben would return soon. She did not know what she would say to him or how she would act. Should she pretend nothing happened? Should she apologize? Should she leave and go back to the city early? Just as the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, she heard footsteps outside. Her heart started beating faster. Through the window, she saw Ben walking up the path carrying some grocery bags. He looked tired but peaceful. Sarah quickly stood up and went to her room. She could not face him yet. She heard him come inside, heard Aunt Rose greeting him warmly, heard their voices talking about dinner. She sat on her bed, her hands shaking slightly. There was a soft knock on her door. "Sarah, dinner is ready," Aunt Rose called. Sarah took a deep breath. She could not hide forever. "Coming," she said, trying to sound normal. When she entered the dining room, Ben was already there, setting the table. Their eyes met for just a second before they both looked away quickly. The air felt thick and uncomfortable. Dinner was the most awkward meal Sarah had ever experienced. Aunt Rose talked about her day, about the neighbors, about plans for the weekend. Sarah and Ben both answered when spoken to, but they never spoke directly to each other. Every time Sarah reached for the salt or bread, she was careful not to let her hand get too close to his. After dinner, Ben excused himself and went outside to check on the garden. Aunt Rose went to her room to read. Sarah was left alone in the kitchen, washing dishes. Her hands moved automatically, scrubbing plates and cups, but her mind was far away. She heard the back door open. She did not turn around, but she knew it was Ben. She could feel his presence behind her. "Sarah," he said quietly. She stopped washing and stood very still, her hands in the soapy water. "I am sorry about last night," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know what I was thinking. I should not have. I did not mean to make you uncomfortable." Sarah finally turned around, drying her hands on a towel. Ben stood near the door, looking miserable and guilty. His eyes were sad. "It is okay," she said softly, though her voice trembled. Nothing really happened. But something did happen, Ben said, stepping a little closer. Maybe not physically, but something changed. I felt it. Did you? Sarah wanted to lie. She wanted to say no, that she felt nothing, that it meant nothing. But when she looked into his honest eyes, she could not do it. Yes, she whispered. I felt it too. The admission hung in the air between them like a fragile thing that might break at any moment. Ben ran his hand through his hair, looking troubled. I do not want to cause problems for you. You are married. You have a life. I am just nobody. Just someone who works in gardens and fixes things. You are not nobody, Sarah said before she could stop herself. You are kind and gentle and you see me. Really see me. My husband does not do that anymore. As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. She had revealed too much. She had opened a door that should have stayed closed. Ben looked at her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. I do see you, he said quietly. From the first moment you arrived, I saw you. And I wish things were different. But they are not different, Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. I am married. Whatever this is, it cannot happen. I know, Ben said, nodding sadly. I know that. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry. Sorry for making things complicated. Sorry for touching you last night. Sorry for feeling things I should not feel. Sarah felt tears building up behind her eyes. I am sorry too, she whispered. Sorry for being weak. Sorry for wanting something I cannot have. They stood there in the kitchen, several feet apart, but it felt like there was an invisible thread connecting them. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking each second of this painful, honest moment. Finally, Ben took a step back. I think it would be better if I stayed away from the house for a few days, he said. Your aunt has other workers who can help. I will tell her I have family business to attend to. You do not have to do that, Sarah protested weakly. Yes, I do, Ben said firmly but kindly. For both of us. This is too hard. He turned and walked toward the door, but before leaving, he looked back one more time. I hope you find happiness, Sarah. Real happiness. You deserve it. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in the kitchen with tears finally spilling down her cheeks. That night, Sarah lay in bed crying silently. She cried for her broken marriage. She cried for the connection she had felt with Ben. She cried for the woman she used to be before life made her feel invisible. She cried because she knew that even though nothing physical had happened, she had betrayed Mark in her heart. The next morning, she told Aunt Rose she needed to go home. Her aunt looked concerned, but did not ask too many questions. As Sarah packed her bags, she kept hoping Ben would appear one last time. But he did not. He kept his word and stayed away. The taxi ride back to the city felt longer than the ride to the countryside. Sarah stared out the window, watching the green fields turn into grey buildings. She thought about what Aunt Rose had said about communication, about not letting the garden dry up. When she arrived at her apartment, Mark was sitting on the couch watching television. He barely looked up when she walked in. You are back early, he said absently. Yes, Sarah replied, setting down her bag. Mark, we need to talk. Something in her voice made him finally look at her. Really look at her. Maybe it was the sadness in her eyes. Maybe it was the way she stood there, small and vulnerable. Maybe it was the fact that she had not said, "We need to talk," in years. He turned off the television and sat up straighter. What is wrong? Sarah took a deep breath. This would not be easy. She would not tell him about Ben. That was her burden to carry. But she would tell him about the loneliness, the emptiness, the feeling of being invisible in her own marriage. Everything, she said quietly, sitting down across from him. Everything is wrong. We need to fix it before it is too late. For the first time in months, Mark really listened. And for the first time in months, Sarah really spoke. They talked until late into the night, saying things that should have been said years ago. It was painful and uncomfortable, but it was honest. Sarah did not know if their marriage could be saved. She did not know if the damage was too deep. But she knew that she had to try. Not because of guilt or duty, but because she owed it to herself to fight for what she had before giving up completely. Days turned into weeks. Sarah and Mark started going to counseling together. They began talking again, really talking. Slowly, very slowly, things started to change. Mark started asking about her day. She started telling him about her feelings. They began touching again, small touches at first, holding hands while watching movies, hugging before bed. It was not perfect. There were still hard days. There were still moments when Sarah felt lonely. And there were nights when she lay awake thinking about Ben, wondering where he was, hoping he was okay. She never went back to Aunt Rose's house. It hurt too much. She called her aunt regularly and sent letters. But she always made excuses about being too busy to visit. One day, several months later, she received a letter from Aunt Rose. Inside was a short note and a photograph. The note said, "Ben wanted you to have this. He left for another city to start a new job. He said to tell you that he hopes you found what you were looking for." The photograph showed the garden at Aunt Rose's house in full bloom. The flowers were beautiful and bright, full of life. Sarah stared at the picture for a long time, remembering that brief moment when she had felt truly seen. She folded the photograph carefully and placed it in a box with other precious memories. Then she went to find Mark. He was in the kitchen making coffee, and when he saw her, he smiled. It was not a distracted smile or a polite smile. It was a real smile, warm and genuine. "I love you," Sarah said suddenly. Mark looked surprised. Then his smile grew bigger. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her into a hug. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself be held. She had learned something important during those days at Aunt Rose's house. She had learned that feeling invisible was not something that just happened. It was something that grew slowly when people stopped paying attention to each other, when they stopped communicating, when they stopped trying. She had also learned that temptation comes in many forms. Sometimes it is not about wanting someone else. Sometimes it is about wanting to feel alive again, to feel seen, to feel like you matter. And that desire can be dangerous if you do not understand where it comes from. Ben had been a mirror showing her what was missing in her life. He had not been the answer. He had been a wake-up call. And though that brief connection had shaken her deeply, it had also pushed her to fight for her marriage instead of letting it die quietly. Was it right or wrong? Sarah did not know. All she knew was that life was complicated, that hearts could wander even when feet stayed still, and that sometimes the hardest journey was the one back to the person sleeping beside you. As she stood there in Mark's arms, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would never let their marriage become invisible again. She would speak up when she felt lonely. She would ask for what she needed. She would not let silence build walls between them. And though a small part of her heart would always remember those few days in the countryside, remember Ben's gentle eyes and that moment in the kitchen, she chose to let it remain what it was. A moment, a memory, a lesson learned. Because in the end, real love was not about perfect moments or racing hearts. It was about choosing to stay, to fight, to communicate, even when it was hard. It was about seeing and being seen, day after day, year after year, through all the ordinary. Imperfect moments that made up a life together. Sarah had found her way back home. Not to a place, but to a person. And this time, she would not let herself become invisible again.